Hello, welcome into the Sport Life channel. My name is Kevin Ward. Let's get right into the video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about some dark horse fantasy quarterbacks going into the 2026 fantasy season. These are just guys that I don't think are on people's top 15 radar. I might have somebody on my list that might be in your radar, but I think he has a chance to finish in the top three potentially. But these are guys that you're going to draft later, and they can end up being some solid pieces going forward. Whether it's they're a trade asset to another team down the line, or the quarterback you picked with the higher pick, you trade to go get other assets to help you with your fantasy season, and this becomes your QB1 going forward. And so these are some guys that I would definitely be listening to as I watch the training camp videos, what I'm seeing in the media, stuff like that. I think their situations have made their potential prospects beneficial, and I think they have enough talent to be able to take their game to the next level from the previous season. So with no further ado, let's get right into it. At number 5, and this is a guy that I think could potentially finish in the top 5. He's in the best situation of his career, and the situation he's in has produced some players that previously we thought were no good, and then they've kind of rehabilitated and developed and gone on to have very productive seasons. And that's Kyler Murray of the Minnesota Vikings. I think most people in the NFL and fantasy community can probably agree on this. Kyler was always a better fantasy quarterback than he ever was an NFL quarterback. Truly a special athlete that completely, he could do anything he wanted to on the field. If he wanted to have a 100-yard rush game, he had the athleticism to do so. He always had a talented arm. He could make plays on the run. He was elusive against the rush. He really did have a lot of qualities that you look for in an NFL starter and a starting quarterback. Obviously, his height and him being so small has hindered him to a degree, but the athleticism and the talent is still there. He leaves an Arizona situation that was slowly crumbling around him, right? They drafted him year 1 under Cliff Kingsbury, and then year 2 they make the playoffs, and you thought he was going to make this ascension. And then a lot of controversy off the field, and slowly but surely Arizona decided to move on. They didn't think that he was the face of the franchise that they wanted going forward. It's sad because you look at his situation back in Arizona. I mean, if he was to have Trey McBride like he did, Marvin Harrison like he did, Michael Wilson like he did, you'd say you feel pretty confident about that skill position group. And then they add Jeremiah Love. So even if he stayed in Arizona, you would think he had, the kind of, skill position guys around him to make him successful. But as we saw last season, him and Marvin just never got on the same page. I think that baffled a lot of people because I think for the most part in the fantasy community, Marvin Harrison, when he initially got drafted out of Ohio State, he went to Kyler. I think most fantasy managers thought, that's not a bad landing spot for how high he was going to go. He could have ended up with a way worse quarterback, way less talented quarterback. And, it just never clicked, ever. And then you look at Michael Wilson, he really ascended with Jacoby Brissett. It wasn't Kyler that really, brought Michael Wilson to, fantasy relevant wide receiver category. It was Jacoby Brissett. Trey McBride was Trey McBride no matter who was throwing them the football. But, as you saw with Kyler, when you saw him play, you thought he relied so much on his talent to get the job done instead of him playing the position the right way. You would see them scheme up a lot of one read RPO stuff, really highlight his athleticism and, try and limit what he's processing on the field, to make quick, easy decisions because he's accurate with the ball when he knows what he wants to do with it. I think the trouble came is when he didn't recognize the defense he saw, or pressure came in and he kind of had to pivot and make a play outside of his legs, because he could easily scramble for a first down on any sort of broken play. But to to sit in the pocket, avoid the rush, and then really dissect what he's seeing downfield. I think he struggled with that sometimes. So he gets released. He goes to an absolutely home run situation in the Minnesota Vikings. Tell me one thing that a quarterback wouldn't love about playing for Minnesota. Playing a dome. Justin Jefferson is still a top 3 wide receiver in the entire sport. Who wouldn't love throwing him the ball? Jordan Addison is as good a number 2 as it gets, and he hits some home run plays, and he's electric. T.J. Hawkinson's one of the more reliable tight ends in fantasy football, and just the NFL, period. They have a strong running game. Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, they complement each other really well to balance out this offense. You got Kevin O'Connell, who I think is one of the more respected head coaches in the NFL. He resurrected Sam Darnold's career, through 30-plus touchdowns with them, 4,000 yards. You could say I think Kyler is just as talented as Sam Darnold, maybe in different ways, but just in terms of how much talent, I think they're kind of on the same tier. They play in a dome, right? Not a whole lot of outdoor weather games, and so again, with all those factors put into the whole equation, I think Kyler's pretty beneficial to be in this spot. Now, from the reports that we're seeing early on is that it's a true QB1 battle between him and J.J. McCarthy. I'm going to guess Kyler's going to win that battle. I don't think Minnesota wants to go through what they went through last year. And what's crazy is from all the bad stuff you heard about J.J. and all the dysfunction that the offense went through, they still went 8-9. You wouldn't have thought that. You thought they would have went 7-10, 6-11. You just thought the world was burning on fire. No, JJ's not the guy. We just saw Sam win a Super Bowl. It's crazy. But now you get a guy like Kyler Murray who's shown he can win. He's taken a team to the playoffs. And he gets to work under the quarterback guru in Kevin O'Connell. And I'll be very interested to see how he can take this project now and maybe revitalize Kyler's career, right? And, the talent's all there. If he can find a way to make him just improve to some degree as an NFL quarterback, sky's the limit for Kyler. Truly is. I think I personally do not think it's that crazy to think he can be a 30-touchdown, 4,000-yard passer, 600-yard rushing quarterback. It wouldn't shock me at all. He has every possible weapon you could hope for at his disposal. And he's got an offensive-minded head coach who has done wonders with other quarterbacks. And I think a lot of fantasy managers are going to be hopefully targeting him later. My thought to you is do not be surprised if, this year he goes in and he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Do not be surprised. And we've seen guys come out of nowhere and have top 5 fantasy seasons that blew us away. Like Sam Darnold was one of them when he was in Minnesota. Pretty sure Geno Smith was either in the top 5 or flirted with the top 5 when he became the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks. So Geno's not nearly as talented as Kyler, and I don't think he has the supporting staff that Kyler has now. So with all that being said, right, I would definitely take a gamble on Kyler Murray. I would even, as long as he's named QB1, I would almost wait to draft a QB if I have a chance to get him in the later rounds and really bolster up my roster. Again, he has rushing ability. He is a talented passer. Okay, I just think he has to learn how to play the position better. And I think Kevin O'Connell does a great job of building a structure around quarterbacks like that need to learn how to play the position again. And I think he'll be successful. I think Kyler is going to thrive this year. All right, on to number 4. I got Cam Ward, quarterback, Tennessee Titans. Last year was a struggle, but you look at his supporting cast, he had nothing. Calvin Ridley gets hurt later on in the season. They weren't even on the same page. That whole coaching staff and the whole infrastructure around him was it was a dumpster fire waiting to happen. They get rid of Bill Callahan, and they completely restart this whole thing. Now you got to look at what they did in the offseason because I think they set him up for success. But before we get into that, I think you got to look, if you go back and watch him play, if you just take the time and watch some of the games he played, I didn't think he played that bad. I thought he was actually really good for the talent he had around him, and I think he tried to do all the right things. And the one thing I really did like about him was he really set a tone and an expectation and a standard in Tennessee that he believes the team and himself should live up to. And I know it's hard to quantify for fantasy purposes, but I just don't think he's going to fold. I think he's going to fight. I think he's going to get better. I think he is a talented football player. So with all that being said, I expect him to improve. Now, the offseason brought a lot of help to him, right? You go get Wan'Dale Robinson, paid a lot of money, probably too much money. I wouldn't have spent that much on a guy like that, but he did have a heck of a year with Jackson Dart. He's a 1,000-yard receiver, and he's going to provide a solid pass catcher to Cam Ward going forward. They draft Carnell Tate with the 4th pick in the draft. They're hoping he's a true X wide receiver and can really dominate on the outside and really give him, a red zone target that he really didn't have last year. And, I think there's some other guys on this team that you're hoping take another step. Like Chimere Dike, I thought he was pretty good last year. And, I expect him to get better and his rapport with Cam Ward to get better. Elick Aomanor, I expect him to also improve. There's going to be some sort of natural chemistry building between, Cam, DK, and Elick Aomanor, as rookies last year going through it all together. And then you add the talent of a Wan'Dale Robinson, a Carnell Tate. I think this team, has improved a lot offensively. Their run game is still, it's solid. I wouldn't say it's great with Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. So, it gives some sort of balance to the offense. And I think, I truly believe this. I think the biggest offseason get they got was Brian Daboll. You go back and you look at his history with young quarterbacks and developing them and getting them prepared for games and how they've looked when they have gotten in those games. They look ready. Jackson Dart's an example. Daniel Jones, he kind of helped him year one with the Giants. They went to the playoffs. Josh Allen early on in his career. And, there were some reports that Daboll, even with the Giants, really liked Cam Ward and they almost thought about trading up. But yeah, I think Daboll is going to install an offensive system that's going to make things a lot easier for Cam. I think Daboll's got quite a few weapons to work with, so I don't think he's working with nothing. And Daboll is he's leaving the Giants job not on great terms. It didn't end the way I think both parties would have hoped, especially with the way it started. Year one they go to the playoffs, but I think he's going to come with an edge. I don't think Brian Daboll's done being an NFL head coach. You look at the guy he's actually working under, Robert Saleh. Terrible tenure with the Jets, not entirely his fault. Sure, there's some things he wish he could have done better. Goes to SF for 1 year, helps them make the playoffs, and then boom, he's a head coach again. Brian Daboll is going to have that sort of similar mindset. Like, hey, if I can make Cam Ward look as good as NFL draft analysts thought he was going to be coming out of the draft, and as good, I think, as some people in the NFL community think he can be, and he shows up on the field, I think there's going to be teams calling for Brian Daboll, because again, that's going to be another successful guy under his tutelage, a young quarterback that got better, and I think that's a very enticing attribute for NFL franchises to be like, all right, we got a guy that if we need to restart this whole thing and we need to draft a quarterback. What a better head coach than a guy who's done it with numerous guys and gotten them ready for the NFL game. So again, I think Cam Ward, he's one of my dark horses. Again, I think you can get him late. I don't think he'll be in most people's top 15 rankings. I truly don't. And I think, that'd be another guy I'd gamble on using a pick on as my quarterback late while I try and bolster my team. Maybe get an extra running back, an extra wide receiver. Maybe use one of your picks on a high-end tight end that you normally wouldn't use because you would try and go get that quarterback. So I would keep an eye on him. I think, I think it's always important to listen to the reports that come out of training camp and OTAs to kind of give me an idea before you do your draft. And he'll definitely be a guy I'm keeping an eye on. I expect him to make a year two jump. I think Cam Ward's going to have a very good year. All right. Moving on. Number 3. He's going to retire this year. Aaron Rodgers. It's kind of sad, for people like me, my age, grew up on guys like Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Philip Rivers, Eli Manning, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Aaron Rodgers, right? Like, these guys defined our NFL childhood, and they absolutely captured our imaginations, and they were so fun, to draft for fantasy football purposes, but just to watch. And, I'll just say this about Aaron. He is the most talented thrower of the football I've ever seen. More than Mahomes, more than Josh, more than anybody. His combination of release, velocity, precision is unlike anything I've ever seen. I think it's crazy he's only gotten 1 Super Bowl. That's a topic for another day, but just talent of throwing the football, no one better that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I will die on a hill and I will argue with you, day and night about that one. But anyway, let's get to the fantasy purposes for him. So, I think his situation got a lot better. And that's so funny to say, right? Because Mike Tomlin, leaves, and he was such a foundation and a stalwart for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and just a sound, consistent voice and presence there. All he did was win. Literally, never had a losing season. So it's hard for me to say, the situation that Rodgers is in now is more beneficial to him. But let's really look at it, right? This offseason, they definitely wanted to bolster the weapons around him. They lost Kenneth Gainwell in the backfield, but they added Rico Dowdle, so I don't know if their run game really got better or worse. For me, it just kind of stays the same. But the weapons on the outside, I think, got better. They drafted Jeremy Bernard, a wide receiver out of Alabama, in the 2nd round. He should help them a lot as just a more dynamic offensive playmaker. Michael Pittman's one of the more underrated wide receivers in the NFL. Just a solid, big, physical guy. Someone who's just super reliable, over the middle of the field and can make plays for you. And I think Rodgers will really benefit having a guy like him. You would hope that DK Metcalf kind of, takes another step forward this year. I think he underwhelmed and underperformed last year, all things considered. And I expect him to take a step forward. And then Mike McCarthy comes over as the head coach, and dream come true for him. This guy's a lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and now he gets to coach the team he grew up rooting for. That's so cool for Mike McCarthy. I mean, I think any NFL fan can relate to that. Like, you get to coach your favorite team growing up. That is truly special. But all things aside, that's a system that Rodgers spent most of his career playing under. He's familiar with it. There's no trying to learn anything new. There's nothing to adapt to. It should be pretty plug and play. It's not the same offense that Mike ran all those years ago, but I'm sure they're going to be in lockstep in what they really want to do. They're going to have a familiarity with each other. And you look at Mike McCarthy, I mean, that guy's always had high-end fantasy quarterbacks playing under him, whether it's Dak or Rodgers, etc. Offenses under Mike McCarthy have always produced, high-end fantasy players. And that's why I'm picking Rodgers as one of my dark horses this year. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he's in the top 10 scoring points this year. I really wouldn't. And you don't think that in his last year, Rodgers is not going to just leave it all out on the field, come out gunning? I mean, I wouldn't bet against him. I think he's going to come out and want to leave his lasting mark on the NFL one last time. And he's going to give it all he's got. So again, just another guy that I would target late in the rounds. I expect him to have a very good year. He's got a much better supporting cast than he did last year. Yeah, I think he has a more offensive-minded head coach and a system that he is super familiar with and one that he'll thrive in. Again, he's never going to be the Aaron Rodgers of old where he's just scrambling, making just sick throws on the run, throwing 50 or 45-yard lasers into just, absolute tight spaces. But he's still one of the smartest quarterbacks in the game. There's not a defense you're going to throw at him that he hasn't seen. And I think his supporting cast this year is much improved, much improved. And again, that also extends out to Mike McCarthy being his head coach. So I expect him to, potentially finish in the top 10. I would definitely be eyeing him in my redrafts in my redraft leagues, and we'll see where it goes from there. All right, number 2, I got Tyler Shough, quarterback, New Orleans Saints. So with him, right, he was this older rookie. They kind of drafted him, and you didn't really know what you were going to get with him. Kellen Moore, first-time head coach, he gets to take over the New Orleans Saints. And you look at their supporting cast last year, they did not have a whole lot to work with. I mean, at all. You have an aging Alvin Kamara who's not nearly as explosive as he once was. You had question marks with Chris Olave going into that season, like concussions and his health. And it's like, all right, the talent's there. He's proven he can be a 1,000-yard wide receiver, but can he stay on the field? And, Shough didn't start off the season as the starter. It took some time, but when he finally got his chance, you saw the talent. And you could tell why Kellen Moore liked him a lot. I think Kellen Moore is a hell of an offensive mind. You look at some of the teams he's been a part of, you look how good Dallas was under him with Dak Prescott all those years. He was the main driving force offensively for why the Eagles won a Super Bowl. And it's funny because, he had to evolve his game. He had to adapt his game going from Dallas to the Eagles, right? Super pass happy, and then he goes to the Eagles, and you realize, okay, obviously Saquon helps a lot, but our foundation is going to be the run game. I'm going to play off that. So he has the skill to adapt to his situation to best benefit his team. You look at Tyler Shough late into the year. He gets his chance. Last 9 games, he averaged 16 points, fantasy points per game. That's nothing to sneeze at all. And then you look at their offseason, they went and added pieces. They added my favorite rookie wide receiver coming out of the draft this year, Jordan Tyson at Arizona State. The big question with him is health. I personally think he is the most complete wide receiver that came out of this class. More than Carnell Tate, more than Mekhi Lemon. He could do it all. I'm actually a huge, huge fan. I think if the health questions weren't there, I think he goes above Carnell Tate. Not saying you made the wrong choice going to Carnell Tate. The guy came out of Ohio State. He was a highly productive player. Usually that works out pretty good for NFL franchises when they pick guys out of Ohio State. But I expect Jordan Tyson to have a chip on his shoulder a little bit. I think he thinks he's the best wide receiver out of this draft. And I think he's going to complement Chris Olave well. And I think he's another dynamic weapon to add to Tyler Shough's arsenal. Another guy that they added that's going to help them balance out their run game, and he's a good, decent wide receiver out of the backfield, is Travis Etienne. He got the big contract going over to New Orleans. He gets to come home, and he's going to provide a dynamic option for Tyler Shough in this offense going forward. I think Kellen Moore's going to hit his stride. I'm really excited to watch the Saints this year. I think the Saints are going to be a fun team to watch. They might catch some people by surprise. And I expect Kellen Moore to dial it up, especially with the full year, knowing that Tyler Shough's his guy going forward in the improved offensive arsenal around him. And again, Tyler Shough, for the last 9 games of the year, with basically just Chris Olave, his cast was nowhere near as good as it is this coming year. He still averaged 16 fantasy points a game. So I expect him to make a leap forward, and I'm actually really excited. And again, I keep going back to this, but as you go on in the fantasy season, right, you start getting into November and December, weather starts playing a factor. Where do they play? They play in New Orleans. They play in a dome. That is so beneficial for NFL offenses going forward. And it's going to benefit Tyler Shough. And, I think it's going to prove I think it's going to prove very beneficial for him. So with all those things considered, with the improved supporting cast, year 2 under Kellen Moore, he plays in a dome, right? I think Tyler Shough could have a really solid year. So again, another guy that I think even some people might fall out of some people's top 15. I would keep an eye on him, keep an eye on what they're saying out of training camp. Is he making strides? Is he getting better? I think another factor we got to think about is they play in a relatively weak division. They do. The team that won the division went 8-9. I don't think I need to say anymore. So with all that considered, that means you're playing 6 games out of your season against teams with losing records last year. So, that provides, nice opponents to go against in beneficial matchups. So again, I would highly, highly invest my time reading up on Tyler Shuck going into this 26th season. And I'm excited to see what the Saints are going forward. They're going to be a fun team to watch. All right. My number one dark horse sleeper fantasy quarterback going into the 2026 season, Tua Tagovailoa. Look, I think he left a lot of sour tastes in people's mouths with how it ended with Miami. And, he's had some high productive years. And he was on some very good teams. He's had some good running backs and, play behind him, and Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane. He's had dynamic wide receiver rooms with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. It's funny. I think a lot of people would probably say Tyreek Hill made Tua whenever he was productive. Like, he was the main reason. And then Mike McDaniel was the offensive mind behind that whole offense. And so, you just saw him kind of teeter off. And I think him being unsuccessful in the playoffs really played into his detriment, and I think it really affected him mentally. Especially you saw him in cold weather games. Like, he disappeared. He was never the same player in cold weather games. And that's tough when you got to go play the Jets, or if you got to go play the Bills, or you got to go play New England, late into the year. That matters. But again, he's had some productive years. You look at some of his past history, he's had good years in Miami. Now, he comes over on a prove-it deal over with the Atlanta Falcons. His situation, I personally think, is as good as anything he ever had with Miami. You have Drake London, who is a very nice ex-wide receiver. He's going to push for 1,100 yards. He's got Kyle Pitts, probably the best tight end he's ever played with. He just came off fresh off a 1,000-yard year. And again, Devon Achane, very, very, very good. He's not Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson will be the best running back he has ever played with. And, a rookie that came out, I think, is going to be a sneaky player. I think Tua's going to like him, especially in some wide receiver screen games, some slant routes, making some explosive plays after the catch as a Zachariah Branch. They took him out of Georgia. He used to play at USC. And I think he's going to provide a nice little boost. And again, I'm going to go back to this because it's going to matter in December and November when you're playing your fantasy football playoff games. They play in a dome. They play in Atlanta, and you look at their division. Their division's not as strong as the division he came from, right? I know he got to play the Jets. I get it. But you still had to play the Bills. You still had to play the Pats, who are pretty good. So now you go to a division where the division winner had a losing record. Less competition, right? And again, you're playing in a dome, and you're playing in a dome in New Orleans when you play a road game in that division. Over with, the division he came from, the AFC East. New England's outside, Buffalo's outside, the Jets are outside. Like, if you got to play Baltimore in the winter, you got to go play Cleveland in the winter, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. Like, those are all potential places you may have, Kansas City. Like, those are all potential places you're going to have to go to late into the year. And you don't know if you could trust this guy in the fantasy playoffs because of his matchup. Even though he has a good supporting cast, it's the environment he's playing in. So now he goes to a situation where, more than half his games are in a dome. And I think that sets up great for Tua to play in those sort of environments. And again, I still think he has a strong supporting cast. Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Zachariah Branch, Bijan Robinson. And, here's a head coach who's now coming over, and it didn't end on good terms with the Browns, right? A little bit of controversy, whatever. I still think Kevin Stefanski is a solid head coach. I think he's a pretty good offensive mind. He's taken some not great Browns teams to the playoffs. He led with that Joe Flacco-led team. They lost to the Texans, but they were super impressive when he took over at quarterback and what Kevin was able to do. With Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, David Njoku, right? And I still think he's a solid head coach. And I think Atlanta was a hell of a spot for him. And I think he's going to have a lot of fun with this football team. And I think another thing that's really gonna play into their hands from a fantasy football perspective, and I know it's kind of odd to look at. I think Atlanta's defense is super solid. Right, they invested a lot in their edge rushers last year, and I think it paid off. Um, and I think their defense was actually very underrated. I think their offense last year was just so inept and just couldn't stay on the field that their defense just had to play longer and longer, and sometimes they break down because they'd be on the field so much. Um, I think Tua is going to be an upgrade over Michael Penix. Okay, I think with Kevin Stefanski, I don't think he's as enamored with Penix's arm and the potential talent that he brings. I think he just needs someone who can operate his offense, understand his scheme, understand what they're trying to do. I think Stefanski's offense is going to be somewhat similar in some ways to Mike McDaniel's. I don't think it's going to be totally foreign for Tua. I think he's going to understand exactly what he needs to do. And, I really don't think it's crazy to think he could throw for 4,000, 25 touchdowns. He's not going to give you a whole lot rushing, so he needs to be a really good pocket quarterback. But I think with, the weather environment that he gets to play in now, which is beneficial for him, and the weapons around him and the head coach, I think Tua is going to have a strong year. And again, this is a prove-it year for him. He wants to be an NFL starting quarterback, whether it's with Atlanta or somebody else. And he's going to have to come out guns blazing to really earn that contract. And again, this would be a guy that I would target late in my draft and really take a flyer on. I'm actually really excited to see what Tua does in this system. So those are my 5 dark horse fantasy quarterbacks going into the 2026 season. Again, I think for the most part these guys fall out of people's top 15 when they think of fantasy starters. Just again, do your research, dig in, listen, to as much media as possible. You gotta find what really works for you and people you trust listening to. But I truly think that some of these guys, doesn't mean they're all going to work out, but these are the guys I'm going to pay close attention to going forward into this 26th season. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to watch this video. And again, good luck into everyone's 26th fantasy season. Got some more content coming out. Have a great day.